Hello, Tubby and Coos fans. Welcome to our author event today. I'm so excited to bring you this author, and hopefully a bunch of people watch. We already have some people joining. Yay. So I am so ready for this. Today, I am talking to tech enthusiast, former NFL player, and super nerd, Chris Kluwe, who is the author of sci-fi action adventure Otaku, which is this book right here. And it is his debut sci-fi novel. And it's a story that's reminiscent of Ready Player One and Ender's Game. But in my opinion, that's like where the comparison ends. It's a unique story all its own. And in my opinion, it's better than Ready Player One. So just FYI. Chris is also the author of acclaimed nonfiction collection, Beautifully Unique Sparkle Ponies, which is good if you haven't read that. A contributor to the short story collection, Press Start to Play, which we sell a lot of, and maybe you've read it, and the lead designer of the tabletop card game Twilight of the Gods. Chris is one of my personal favorite nerds on Twitter, so I'm really excited to talk to him, and hopefully y'all be excited to hear him. Welcome, Chris. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me on.
And so tell us, to start off, if you could tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe 3 things about yourself that you think everyone should know.
Okay. Well, about me, I am a nerd turned football player. So growing up, I definitely much rather would have been reading books or playing video games. But my parents were like, it's sunshine outside. You need to go outside. Obviously, this was before our current quarantine situations when you can still go outside. But yeah, it turns out I was pretty good at athletics too. So I ended up playing baseball and soccer growing up, then played football, and happened to play in the NFL. But yeah, my heart has always been with the big, almost like library stacks of books that my parents would have lying around, most of which were science fiction fantasy. So I got started at a really young age reading those. Let's see, 3 things about myself that people should know. I was in a top 3 U.S. World of Warcraft rating guild. I played against the, at the time, Guinness World Record holder for Guitar Hero and managed to beat him in a song, which I was very proud of.
That's amazing.
Third was, I believe we jousted on the Joko cruise.
We did joust on the Joko cruise, and it was super fun. I blasted this in all the Joko cruise groups, so there might be some Joko folks watching.
Great, yeah, no, oh man, I missed joust. Like that's a fun game to play.
Super fun.
Yeah, it's funny too because it's kind of the it's similar to kind of the idea in the book of the, melding the video game world and actual world where, it really is, okay, what are your physical capabilities that determines, how well you do in the game. And, as I'm sure you no doubt noticed when you're playing Joust, you tend to get hot and sweaty very quickly. There's a lot of moving around.
It's so true. Way more moving around than playing any other video game I play.
Yeah, no, that's for sure.
So tell us a little bit about your book Otaku. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Yep. And how it came about.
Cool. I brought my own copy too.
Yay!
Just to reference anything. So it initially came about as kind of a direct response to Gamergate. For those who aren't familiar with Gamergate, it was a bunch of assholes online being assholes online, particularly to women and people of color. So yeah, I was not a fan of Gamergate. And I wrote a letter indicating I was not a fan of Gamergate. The Gamergaters didn't like it. So I got a small taste of what the harassment other people were going through. And to me, it was something where, like, I know the types of media that the Gamergaters enjoyed. Like, I know the stories that they envision themselves as the heroes in, and the things, the entertainment they like to consume. And so me being the troll that I am, I wanted to write a book where it's like, oh, you would totally see yourself as the hero in this. And then right around chapter 3 or 4, you'd be like, oh man, I'm the bad guy. So yeah, that was kind of the primary impetus of Otaku, just kind of poke a finger in the eye of internet assholes, which is usually why I do a lot of things. But then it kind of, from that, kind of sprang the idea of, okay, where do I see the world going in the next 30, 40, 50 years? What are important things that are happening now that will probably still be happening in the future that we should address both now and in the future? Because a lot of the best science fiction fantasy I've read has been, it's set in an alternate world or it's set in a different time, but it very much is dealing with current socio-economic problems or current cultural problems or just a way that the world is in a way that we'd like the world to be. And so I wanted my book to be, good along those lines as well, and not just, just a pure escapist adventure like sci-fi book.
Yeah, and I think it definitely is. You can totally tell that you were like mad about Gamergate. The bad guys in this, this book are like total asshole trolls.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's well, and the thing that's funny is that like I've actually gotten quite a few responses, mainly negative reviews. And I do love reading my reviews. Like I love reading them. But there are some where just like, oh, I don't believe that anyone gets this kind of attention online. This is so over exaggerated and over the top. I'm just like, you don't talk to a lot of women, do you? If anything, I was being like calm and restrained in the type of abuse that people are facing. And I know we're kind of laughing about it, but it really is this really terrible, unfortunate reality of the internet is that people, especially white men, young white men, don't think it's a real place, and they think they can lash out at people, and they think they can say whatever they want, and that it doesn't matter because they don't see the person on the other side of the screen. And as we're coming to see, the internet is more and more a part of our life. Again, especially now when you can't really go outside and talk to people, you can't interact with other people unless you want to risk catching a plague and dying, which personally I don't want to. But stuff that happens online, it's just as real as stuff that happens in the physical world.
Absolutely. And one question that I had was that considering our current shift because of the pandemic, we're currently shifting into more digital spaces. And so I think that this book has become a lot more relevant than ever, because you grapple with this idea of identity and personhood in the digital space and like what that means on a global scale. And you address this real fear about the consequences of the virtual world and the real world crossing over, which is what I think makes your book unique and interesting. And I was just wondering if these were like intentional themes when you were writing. Did these just come out as you wrote? Like, did you mean to do all of that?
Yeah. Oh yeah. No, they were absolutely intentional because growing up, so I want to say I was about probably like 12 or 13 when the internet first started really kind of becoming the internet for mass consumption. When the AOL CDs were being sent out, you could buy a month's worth of AOL internet. But, so like that was like my formative teenage years was kind of growing up with the internet. And these were all things that, I grew up in. Like this was my world. And that world is still the same today, only now kids don't have a memory of what it was like before that, because to them, the internet's just always been there. Like that's always been a world for them. They don't know a world without it. And so if we don't, if we don't grapple with those problems, if we don't solve those problems, they're not just going to magically go away. Like it's like no problem goes away just because you want it to go away. You have to work at it. So like for online, that means services like Facebook and Twitter, that means hiring moderators, hiring therapists for your moderators, because they have to look at terrible shit. And then they have to deal with looking at terrible shit. I mean, it's all the little things about which frequently are about spending money that companies don't want to spend because they would rather make a profit, even if it means that the world is a worse place. And so that those were very much in my mind when I was writing this, is like, I want people to be aware that I have thought about these things, and that I do want you to pick up on these contextual clues and these meta narratives that are in the book, because it's important. We need to talk about these things.
Absolutely. And I mean, there's like a lot in this book, like a lot of political tension. And one of the big things is like, it's government versus religion, because you have this like faction that's much more religious, and then this other faction that is not, and they sort of fight each other. And so, yeah, there's a lot. There's like, did you deal with digital sex work? You deal with, just misogyny generally, and identity, and all kinds of stuff. So, and it seemed intentional, which is why I asked that. Like, was this intentional? It seems like it is.
Well, so one of the things is actually, one of the underlying sort of causes in the book of the narrative is that the United States engaged in a civil war with itself because of water. Right. And that ended up splitting the country into sort of a corporatist faction and a religious faction, because when you look at like a lot of the tensions in our modern society, it is very much religious fundamentalist driving a certain set of views, Then you have, the corporate technocrats driving another set of views. Then you have a bunch of people who kind of just want to be left alone to live their life, and are generally okay as long as other people aren't screwing with them. But it's not really them who usually call the shots, because, they just want to be left alone to live their lives. And I think the only thing I got wrong was that I thought the war would be about water and not about pandemic. So, that one's on me. But I was also a history and poli-sci major in college. So I have studied a lot of ways that societies fall apart. And no society has ever lasted. That's just a guarantee of history. But the thing is that if you want that to change, you have to know why societies fail, because then you can avoid making their mistakes. And so, I think the United States right now is at that stage of empire where we're in the slow decline part. Generally most empires last around 300 years. We're, surprise, surprise, right around the 300-year point. Now we're starting to hit that decline. However, that doesn't mean that it has to happen. We can stop it from happening, but you have to want to stop it from happening, and you have to know how to stop it from happening, which means studying the mistakes of the past. So again, yes, that's another context in the book. I try to pull in a lot of ideas. I like having lots of layers.
It is, but I also want folks to know that it's not heavy-handed, which I was really impressed with that, because especially since it's not your first book, but it's your first sci-fi book, and you did a really, really good job of putting all of this stuff we're talking about in there, but not hitting people over the head with it. It's still like, a sci-fi action adventure story with a lot of stuff going on. It's not like I did not feel constantly hit over the head with like, you need to know this. And right. I thought you did a good job balancing that.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And so this book actually it's almost also sort of an homage to like William Gibson type books, right? Like Neuromancer and Adoru, and his most recent ones like the Agency and the Peripheral. Like, and one of the things I love about his books is that he usually puts you into a world, but he doesn't really explain that world. He expects you as the reader to figure out, okay, what's going on in this world from, contextual clues. Like, okay, if they're talking about these things and they're referencing these things, what does that mean within the context of this world? Another author who does that, Elie Medesset Jr., does a really good job of doing that in his science fiction writing. Like, he's another author I love to read. But that was kind of the style I wanted to try to emulate for Otaku, was that I knew I wanted to talk about all of these things, but I also knew I didn't want to write a freaking, here's a 50-page Ayn Rand freaking monologue on why the steel and rail companies are bad. Let's get it out after page 5. So yeah, I mean, it is there if you want to go looking for it, but I also want it to be, a book people can pick up and read. And if you just want cool action sequences and people fighting with swords and, all that kind of stuff, you can read it for that too. Like, I love action sequences. Like
the first thing in this book, this is not spoilery because this is literally the first thing in this book, is an encounter in the Infinite game where the main character fights a dragon one-on-one and literally jumps into its mouth and cuts her way out from the inside. So like, there's a lot of that too.
I love action scenes. Like, because when I write them, like, I'm always writing them envisioning how would this play out in like a movie theater screen, right? Or like as an anime or something like that. I'm just like, what's the most badass, ridiculous thing I can think of? How do I make it logical? Right? It's like, how does this make sense in the context of what I'm writing? Oh, hey, I know how to do that. And then you have Ash slicing her way out of a dragon's stomach.
It's awesome. And the other thing that I was really entertained by in this book are your insults. Like, how did you come up with all of these insults? And it's the main characters insulting the trolls mainly that, of course, entertained me. So there are some really good ones in here.
So I'm kind of known for that. And I played a lot of it on back when I played World of Warcraft. For the first, I'd say 4 or 5 years of the game's lifespan, the realm forum boards, right? So each realm that players played on, like each realm was its server. Those realms each had a forum, and those forums were completely unmoderated. I mean, no moderation whatsoever. And it was the Wild West. And I quickly found out that, if you wanted to be heard, you either had to say something very insightful or you had to say something very funny, or you could do both. And one of the things I really enjoyed doing was finding the people who were being trolls in an asshole-ish way and then counter-trolling them, which frequently meant, okay, you think you're, the baddest person on this message board. How can I go after you? But it was something that I found doing essentially God, I wouldn't call it professionally trolling. Well, I mean, yeah, it was professionally trolling because I was playing football at the time. So basically during the day, I'd be in the locker room because I didn't have practice. I'd be on the computer trolling people on the Wild Realm forum boards. But what I found was that if you can put together an insightful point that you want to make. So say you have an argument that you want to make, then you can also include something humorous with it. In my case, usually it's some form of entertaining swear word. People will remember the humorous part of it, and then that will trigger the point that you were trying to make. And that was something that I did in the first Deadspin letter I wrote that went viral, which they titled, it was a defense of same-sex marriage, basically, you know, speaking out on people who wanted to ban same-sex marriage. And it was titled, They Won't Magically Turn You into a Lustful Cock Monster. And so, I mean, it just spread like wildfire because everyone's like, wait, what? Lustful cock monster? What is this? And then all of a sudden, now they're talking about same-sex marriage. Now they're talking about, you know, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, you know, freedom of expression to be who you are. And so if you can marry the two things together, then it really does a great job of making that information stick in people's brains. And it gives them an opening to talk with other people about it. Whereas, you know, you can't, if you walk up to, you know, one of your friends, you might not just be able to be like, hey, let's talk about same-sex marriage. Whereas if you can walk up and be like, hey, did you hear about lustful cock monsters? Then all of a sudden you can have that conversation.
It's true. And this book is like a masterclass on how to troll trolls, just FYI to people watching. My favorite, I'm going to tell you my two favorite insults just for fun. The first is goat filleting taint snorter, which I love. And the second is trash fire baboon babies. I really love both of those. Like, I'm stealing this immediately. I'm going to call people this online now.
Yeah, so the thing is, a good insult too, it also has a flow to it, right? It has a rhythm. So there's almost like a mouth feel to where when you say it out loud, you're like, oh, that feels really good coming out of my mouth. You know, there's alliteration, you know, there's a certain number of syllables, like everything just has to line up, but you know when you've got one because you say it and you're like, oh yeah, oh yeah, I want to say that again.
This is good. So let's talk about your world building a little bit, because I'm curious as to what your process was. In this book, there are essentially two worlds. There's the real, which is the real world, and there's the infinite game, which is your gaming world. So how did you determine like what you wanted the game to be like and look like? I'm also curious as to where the mega spires came from. Can you kind of walk us through a little bit just how you did that?
Sure. Yeah, so basically the idea for Infinite Game was, I mean, you've seen it in like a million different anime and like video game type movies. It's essentially a world where you can log in and you can be a character in that world. However, the thing that I did differently with mine is that usually in those worlds, there's really no restrictions on what your character can do other than like your skills in game or stuff like that. And in Infinite Game, I wanted there to be a subsection of it because part of my life, you know, is being a professional athlete and knowing, you know, what you have to go through in order to be a professional athlete, how you have to train your body. And so I wanted part of the game to be, okay, here's the portion that's set aside for, in order to do this stuff, you have to actually be able to do it in real life. You know, the game's mapping it one-to-one to what your body's doing, because the thing is, when you look at esports, when you look at you know, video games, those kids are putting in just as many hours as physical athletes, right? You know, they're practicing 8-10 hours a day. They're working on honing their skills. They're working on their focus and their concentration at a level that is the same level as someone who's training to become like a pitcher or a catcher or, you know, a linebacker or a quarterback. I mean, the only difference is the medium with which they're expressing themselves. So that was kind of the crossover between my video game experience and my professional athletic experience. Was I wanted that to be a part of the game. So that influenced a lot of what Infinite Game actually is. And in like, it's not in the book itself, but in Candyland, so that's kind of the base level. That's where I think I referenced it once. It's like that's where you have the AI assist. So that's kind of what people would see as more the traditional online game, where, you know, you can do whatever you want, fly around, do whatever. Like, it's not actually mapped to your body. But the thing that the people watch and want to watch is that, okay, here's where, you know, you see the athletes running around. Here's where you see someone literally cut their way out of a dragon because they were able to do that in real life, you know, dodging the dragon's claws, stuff like that. So yeah, for Infinite Game, that was what kind of that sprung from. As far as the physical world in it, the mega spires were sort of the idea of, in Minnesota, there's the Skyway system, right? Where you don't have to go outside during the winter because obviously it's freezing cold. I lived in Minnesota for, I think, 6 years, and I live in California now, which is much nicer. It's where I grew up. But Minnesota, the Skyway system, it allows you to travel from building to building to building without ever going outside. And one of the underlying themes of the book is also climate change. It's the idea that, the waters are rising. We're really not doing anything to stop it. We've set these giant engines into motion, and we don't know how long it's going to be that they're ramping up and ramping up and ramping up. So the book itself takes place in Miami, which if you talk to any sort of federal disaster person or risk management person, they're going to tell you Miami is absolutely fucked. Like that city has no chance. But the thing about humanity is when we have no chance, that's usually when we stick around anyways. We find a way to try and make it work. So the megaspires are essentially giant skyscrapers that are kind of thrusting out of the ocean that has come to claim Miami, and they're linked together by these skyway systems because people aren't going to want to leave it first, right? They're going to want to try to keep the waters back. And only when it becomes so obvious that they can't, they just can't ignore it anymore, only then that's when people will leave. But it's only the people with means that will leave, right? So that's why Ditch Town is essentially kind of the slums. And then you have the dry burb enclaves that are on shore in dry land because, again, socioeconomic realities, generally it's the wealthy people who flee to dry land and they leave everyone else to fend for themselves. So yes, I was thinking of all this stuff when I was writing it. But it's like world building to me is important in that it shapes your character's actions, but your characters are what's important about your book because that's who people are going to identify with. But you can't have good characters in a book unless you have a good world that makes sense. So you got to have both. Like, I mean, if your world just doesn't make sense, it's really hard to have good characters within that world because no one's going to be able to grasp why those characters are acting the way they do. And vice versa, you can create the most amazing world ever, but if your characters aren't interesting, well, who gives a shit? So hopefully that answered your question. I know that was kind of long.
It definitely did. And that actually gives a good segue into my next question, because I wanted to talk about your main character of Ashley / Ashura, or Ash. And she's a super badass woman of color. And she's very successful as a woman in a male-dominated space, but she's also like well-rounded. She's got her own hang-ups. She's not perfect, but she's still super badass. So I was just wondering where she came from. Why did you choose her as your main character? And did you find it difficult to write a woman as your main character? Or did she?
So the original idea behind Ash was, who can I think of that would most irritate the alt-right online? That was a bisexual, half black, half Japanese woman with a dyed lock of blue hair. I figured that would probably do it. Now, the thing is, though, is that I knew, okay, if I'm going to write this character cannot be a caricature, right? Like this cannot be any sort of like, oh yeah, physically this is what she looks like, but it's, a white man, obviously, who's doing all this stuff. So one of the big things that I did with Otaku is when I wrote my first draft and then I sent it off to women that I knew, that I'm like, hey, give me your honest feedback on this. Like, what works, what doesn't work. And so I got, honest feedback. They're like, hey, this doesn't work. This isn't what a woman would do. I'm like, great, I'm changing it. Because I'm not a woman, right? I'm not a black woman. Like, I don't know what that experience is. So I need to be able to listen to people who have had those experiences, and I need to be able to internalize it and know that it's okay for me to be wrong about something as long as I'm willing to change my mind, right? And I feel a lot of people get hung up on that. They get so afraid of like, oh, well, what if I make a mistake? It's okay to make mistakes. Just don't make the same mistake twice. Like, learn from what people are telling you. It's really not that hard. So yeah, so a big part of it was, reaching out to one of my friends. Her name's Tanya DePass. She runs I Need Diverse Games. She is a black queer woman. And so, and I knew immediately, I'm like, hey, Tanya, like, I really want your feedback on this because, it's important to me that when you read this book, if you are represented in it, that it feels authentic to you, right? Like it feels like this would be your lived experience. Because one of the other things with this book is that I want, someone who's like Ash to read it and be like, oh, hey, cool, that person's like me. And, that inspires me to do stuff. Or I want someone who's like Wind or Slen to read it and be like, oh, hey, cool, that inspires me. Like I want to do what they do. So yeah, that was a big part of me, was making sure I got the characters right. You know what I mean? And that they felt believable, but also that, they were badasses, because again, I was writing this stereotypical white male power fantasy, only it's just not white men. So they get to be badasses. Suck it, haters.
And I have to say that I was impressed with that, because as someone who clearly reads a lot of books, typically books by white men are aren't the best at this stuff.
No, they're not.
And you actually did a really good job. And as someone who, one of the big things in this book is abuse as well. And and as someone who comes from a background where I was abused, I felt like you handle those issues very authentically, and the way that Ash thinks about them and things that happened to her, it did feel authentic to me. And so I was just impressed with the way you handled all of that, because I didn't expect it, honestly. Because, I mean, I did, because I follow you on Twitter, and I'm like, if he doesn't do this right, I'd be really mad. But
well, I know that, like, and that's the last thing I want to do. I don't want to let people down, because I know, like, the shit is important. Like, and one of the things I've always tried to show with my own life is, like, I mean, as John Scalzi puts it, like, I have it on easy mode, right? Like, I am a tall, relatively good-looking, heterosexual white male. The world is my oyster. There are a lot of people who don't look like me. Like, there are a lot of people, you know, who will never have the same advantage as I do. And it is important to recognize that, and it's important to work to rectify that situation, because, and like, this is my athletic, competitive, selfish part coming out, is because I want to know that when I beat you, you were at your best, right? Like, I don't want to win because you got shackled with 100-pound weight at the starting line. Like, I want to know that we both did our best and I won because I was better. So it might be kind of a selfish reason, but hopefully I've kind of turned it into some sort of empathy and understanding, you know, why people aren't allowed the same, you know, advantages that I am, you know, why the world is set up in a way that there are so many repressive elements trying to keep people down. And until we address that, like, it's not a fair race. Like, it's not, and I want it to be a fair race. Like, everyone should have the same advantages I got.
I agree. I'm a white person too. And even though I'm not like a dude, I'm still have a lot of advantages over other people. And I agree that I want it all to be very equal. And I did find it really cathartic too, that that Ash especially, and her little band of women, but Ash for sure, like, straight up, like, kicks ass of, like, would-be assaulters. Like, she gets into some situations where it's like, oh shit, and she just, like, slaughters, and I'm like, yes, this is so good. I wish, you know. So, like, that was so cathartic. It was like, yes, because it's not what you expect to happen. And that's maybe a little spoilery, but it's awesome.
Well, so that was actually really funny, because when I sent out my first drafts to women to read it, like, all of them were like, Chapter 8 is amazing. You cannot let them change Chapter 8. And one of the notes I got back from my first editor was on Chapter 8. It was, do you think this goes too far? And I'm like, nope. Do not change a thing.
It goes just far enough.
Yep. So, and I mean, and it really is, like, it's such a trope where it's like, you know, oh, we have to have the female protagonist be in danger and be assaulted because that somehow establishes her vulnerability. It's like, if your character is the baddest of badasses and has spent her entire life training to kick the shit out of things, she's going to kick the shit out of things. That's what she does.
That's absolutely true. And it's awesome. It was, when I read that, I was just, like, on the floor. I was like, this is just the greatest thing ever.
Sorry, 1 second. Let me remind my daughter that she has a drum lesson.
Okay, sure. No problem.
Remy, you have your drum lesson. Oh, it got canceled? Oh, because of me. All right. Apparently, I'm in charge of canceling my daughter's drum lesson.
Well, there you go.
So we are good to go.
Cool. So tell us about what you're currently reading. Do you have any recommendations for us?
Yes. So I am fortunate enough to be one of the reviewers for Lightspeed magazine. So I get to read a lot of arcs that aren't quite out yet. And my most favorite one that I've read recently was Harrow the Ninth, which is the sequel to Gideon the Ninth, which everyone needs to read. Go read Gideon right now. And it'd be very sad that Harrow got delayed, because Harrow's even better. like I feel like kind of a dick for saying it, because I already got a chance to read it. But I mean, Gideon was one of the just weirdest but most compelling books I have read in probably the last decade. Like, the world building in that is just amazing. And then the characters are so good and their development is so good. Like, Oh, it's so good. And then Harrow's even better. So yes, go read Gideon the Ninth, and then go buy Harrow the Ninth when it comes out. So good. There's another one. It was actually, let me go grab it real quick. I think it's in my bookshelf. Chaos Rising by Jesse Mihalik. The first one is called Polaris Rising, and when I read it, it's almost like action sci-fi, and I don't want to say romance because there is definite connotations attached to the romance genre, but it is a sci-fi novel written by a woman who focuses more on the relationships of her characters. Feels like a romance novel at times. There's definitely some steamy scenes, but there's also kick-ass action scenes. Like, it's really good. If you're not a huge sci-fi person, I would recommend you read it because I'm not a romance reader, but I read it, I'm like, wow, this is really good, and it's not romance. This is definitely sci-fi. So yeah, Polaris Rising is the first one in that. Chaos Reigning is the third one in the series, and it finishes up with that one. So those three are really good too. Let's see, other ones that I've read recently. Shoot, I'd have to go to my bookshelf.
That's totally fine. I am like 70% done with Harrow the Ninth. As a bookstore owner, I get art too, and I was excited to get that one because I really liked Gideon, and it's wild. Like, I thought Gideon was wild. This book is like, I have no idea what's happening until like most of the way through.
Have you gotten to the fight scene in the river?
So there's kind of one towards the beginning. If there's one towards
there's one near the end. Trust me, you'll know when you get to it.
No, then I have not gotten to that yet.
This is a scene that I want to see on a screen somewhere. Like, it is one of the most epic things like I have ever seen imagined, like in a book or anything else. And when I read it, I was like, holy shit. that took some balls to write, because that was amazing.
I'm really excited because the huge scene at the end of Gideon is really good too.
Mm-hmm. Like I said, Harrow is even more. It's so good.
I love how wild these books are. That's my favorite part about them.
Yeah, no, Tamsin, right? Tamsin Moore, I believe.
Yeah, Moore. Yeah.
Just goes for it, like, absolutely, like, and I mean, massive props for that, because it can be hard to write something like that and not know, okay, is the audience, are they going to appreciate what I've worked towards, are they going to care about it? But you also have the part of there also has to be a part of you that just says, you know what, fuck the audience, I'm writing this for me.
Yeah.
I'm writing this because I want to read it.
So what are you currently working on? What's next for you? Do you have more books coming?
I do. I am working on stuff. So I'm working on one that is a like far future sci-fi one. So if Otaku was kind of like homage to Gibson, Cyberpunk, this one would be sort of an homage to like Charlie Stross, Ian M. Banks, kind of that wild sci-fi stuff. And right now it doesn't really have a title. I think I posted on Twitter, my working title is fucking Space Adventures. But it is just like, I'm allowing myself to explore a lot of wild ideas, primarily dealing kind of with the idea of AI and like, what is intelligence, right? Like, what is life? What is humanity? Like, how do these things, work together? How do they define themselves? And so far, I think I'm about 62,000 words into that one. Not sure how long it'll end up going, probably like 110,000. But yeah, it's been a blast to write so far, and I'm having a lot of fun with it. The other one is a buddy of mine, Andy Reiner. He's the executive editor at Game Informer. We've been friends for a long time. We actually wrote a sci-fi book together, Prime, which came out. We self-published that one, I think, 10 years ago. Pro tip to any authors out there: if you write a book and you're going to sell it on Amazon, do not name it Prime, because no one will find your book. So we're working on a new one that we initially just started writing because we're like, we have this idea and we want to write it. And basically the idea was there is a detective who, like, very noir style, set in like kind of 1930s-ish Chicago. It's the rainy streets, the hard-boiled detective. Only the detective has a shark head and all the people in the world have animal heads. So, really, that's the conceit of the book. So we're having a lot of fun writing it because it's kind of like a deep dive into almost like a period piece, right? Of kind of that gangster era Chicago, what was going on with, with the end of Prohibition and everything, but Also, a big part of it has to do with what was going on with the establishment of the automobile industry. Because a lot of people don't know that most major American cities had a very successful streetcar and trolley car system for a long time. And it wasn't until, essentially private industry backed by the government started pushing automobiles that those streetcars and trolley cars got dismantled. Like the US used to have really good public transportation. That was a thing that we had. We could still do that. It would be okay. So yeah, if you can't tell, I like working in social issues into my writing.
Well, those sound awesome. I would totally read a book that was called fucking Space Adventures.
I might still call it that.
I would definitely read that book. And the second one sounds like very BoJack.
Oh yeah, no, it's ridiculous. Like it's pure ludicrousness, but I love it. I love it so much. I'm having so much fun writing it.
Well, those sound awesome. Well, we are going to open it up to questions too. If anyone has any questions, type them in the comments. I will share them and Chris will answer them if you have questions. While that's going on, where can people find you? I know for sure that people can find you on Twitter. I've been following Chris a long time. He's at Chris Warcraft on Twitter.
I actually recently joined Instagram. Let me see if I remember my username, because someone jacked my Chris Warcraft username, which sucks. But I think I'm at Chris Kluwe on Instagram. That should be me.
Cool.
Let's see. Yes, I am Chris Kluwe, just all one word.
Okay, so that's just your name, and Chris Warcraft on Twitter.
Yep.
So you can find him there. You can also, of course, we would love you to buy the book if anything you've heard has interested you. Hopefully,
for your local bookstores.
Yay! And buy Otaku. It's so good, y'all. You would really like it. This is the book, and it is, of course, available on our bookshop site, bookshop.org/shop/Tubby and and we have an author events list, and so you can find this on that list. Or you can just search for it either way. You can also email us if you want to purchase it directly, info@tubbyandcoos.com. Either way works for us, but you should definitely buy this book. It's really good. And I thank Chris for writing it.
Thank you for reading it.
So,
thank you everyone who has read it. I really appreciate it.
A couple of comments just to share with you, Chris. Will said a little bit earlier when we were talking about the scene at the beginning of the book where she goes into the dragon and cuts her way out. Will said that scene made him immediately want this book because he did that once in a D&D game.
That's awesome. Yes.
And then Nicole said that this book stream is the epitome of two people nerding out together. And she's glad she's not the only one who gets this excited about things.
So that was actually one of the things that was really funny about being in the locker room is that, I'd be in there like literally painting like War Machine miniatures or, opening up Magic the Gathering cards. And I'd have guys come up to me and be like, what are you doing? Like, why are you interested in that? I'm like, because we all geek out about something. Like, you guys have hunting and fishing and boats, and like you could have like a 2-hour-long conversation on the motor you just bought for your boat. Like, that's great. Geek out about your boat motor. But don't be surprised when I geek about my miniatures.
Right? And Brian said he loved the book. It was a page turner. You covered so many great parts that he loved about it. So let's get into details. You went into a lot of details about food and the cooking, which you did. Can you talk a bit about that?
Sure, yeah. So one of the things that I actually started doing when I retired from football was I became the cook at home because when I was playing, my wife was the one who stayed at home, took care of the kids, did all the chores. Once I was done, then because we had decided even like before we got married that, okay, if I had a football career, that would be, my time to pursue a football career. And then once I was done, then she would get to pursue her career. And so once I was the stay-at-home dad, it was like, okay, well now you need to learn how to cook. And so at first I was like, oh man, I don't know how to cook. Like this is some weird thing. Like how can I do this? But after playing around for a while, like I realized cooking it's a lot like Legos, kind of like you can put them together in a lot of different ways and make a lot of really cool stuff. And unlike baking, cooking, you can kind of wing it. Like you can throw a dash of this and a bit of that, and if it turns out good, great, turns out good. Baking is science. You really need to pay attention to what you're doing when you bake. So word of warning out there. But yeah, so with the cooking in the book, like the garlic noodle recipe, like the one that Johnny's making. So like my wife asked me to make that all the time because I love garlic noodles. She loves garlic noodles, and it's actually really easy to make. Like you just get a bunch of garlic and then you saute it, and then you get the noodles and you throw them in, some sesame oil, and you're good to go. So yeah, it's it's one of those dishes that like it can seem intimidating at first, where you're just like, well, I don't know if I can do this. But after you practice it, a bunch, after you've gone through it a bunch of times, then it just becomes something that you do. So I would say to anyone out there, like, don't be afraid of cooking. Like, you'll make mistakes, you'll mess up at first. Like I had one where I was making a pot roast in a Dutch oven, and you were supposed to let it cook on high on the stovetop, and then put it in the oven at 200 degrees. I left it on high on the stovetop for 4 hours. So it got slightly carbonized when I pulled the lid off. So yes, you will make mistakes. That's okay. Don't let that make you afraid of trying cooking or anything new. Like it's okay to make mistakes.
It definitely is. I'm not a cooker, but I'm a baker. So I agree with you. It's why I like baking, because cooking is kind of too free for me. Right. And I'm very scientific, and I'm like, right. Okay, I can do these ratios and make sure that this is correct. Right. Whereas with cooking, I am afraid of it.
Yeah, no. I mean, and that's fair. Like baking is very much okay. If I do exactly this and this and this and this at this temperature, like all of this will come together and it will be amazing. Like I'll make like brownies and cookies, because those are pretty simple. Everyone has the ingredients for them. But there was I think it was like 3 or 4 years ago. My mom was like, your dad's birthday's coming up and he wants a pineapple upside down cake. I'm like, okay. And she's like, you get to make it for him. I'm like, I've never made that before. So, I mean, it turned out pretty well. The instructions. Yeah. But yeah, I was just like, okay, I guess I'm doing this and then this and then this and then this. Yeah, it's baking. Yeah, baking's fun too. It's just the problem is if you do too much baking, you eat all the baking stuff, and then you're like, oh no.
It's true. So we do have a few more questions coming through here. So Nicole asks, as someone who has been a pro athlete and a pro nerd, how can adults help bridge the gap between jocks and geeks for kids?
That's a good one. So the good news there is that a lot of that bridge gapping is kind of happening naturally already, because kids these days grow up with iPads, with laptops, tablets. Most houses have a PC these days. When I was growing up, like it was considered rare, to have a personal computer with an internet connection in your house. Like, it wasn't like unheard of, but it was definitely like only the nerds were the ones who had a computer in their house. Whereas nowadays it's like, okay, if you don't have a computer in your house or a tablet or a phone, like it's like, are you Amish? Like, do you not believe in electricity? So, I mean, it is one of those things where I think a lot of that problem is going to solve itself in the next, 10 to 50 years, because kids are going to grow up not knowing a world without electronics. And to them, there's games on electronics and you play those games. I mean, when I first got into the NFL, most of the players had no idea what video games were. They're just like, that's something nerds do. But then around, year 6, year 7, year 8, you get rookies coming in. They're like, yeah, man, I play World of Warcraft. Like I played Final Fantasy 12. I'm just like, all right, good on you. But the other thing is that you can tell kids, hey, the amount of time you dedicate to something, that just shows that you're interested in it. So like, it doesn't matter if you dedicate, 10 hours to football, or if you dedicate 10 hours to being the best League of Legends player in the world, you're still dedicating your time to doing that. Everyone gets to geek out about something. Like you're not defined by a single hobby. So you can focus on one particular thing. And if it's a electronic video game thing, that's fine. If it's a physical activity thing, that's fine. If you want to do both, that's fine too. Like don't let people limit what your hobbies are. Don't let people limit what you want to do. You're the only person who can limit that, and don't do it.
And Megan, this is an interesting question as well, and it wasn't specifically covered, but she said she's interested in what you said about not lapsing into caricature when you write characters. How do you avoid it when writing about well-known places like Chicago or Miami?
Yeah, so that's a good one. So like Miami, right? Everyone thinks, white beaches, you've got the skimpy bathing suits, drug dealers going by in the cigarette boats, because that is, the caricature that Miami has kind of had in the public consciousness. And so when I was writing about it, I was like, okay, well, first off, in my world, there aren't any beaches in Miami anymore. So that solves one problem. And then the biggest thing that the people living there in that time are going to be concerned with is staying alive, right? They're going to be concerned about food. They're going to be concerned about water. They're going to be concerned about keeping the lights on. And I mean, like, if you want to make your places seem realistic, you have to look for the dirt, right? You have to look for the grungy parts of what actually exists in real life and then extrapolate that to the city that you're writing about. So, for example, the book I'm working on with Andy about the shark detective in Chicago, it's not just, Chicago mobsters, people doing this. It's like, well, no. So what did that actually look like at the time in the 1930s? There were soldiers who'd come back from World War I, panhandling on the streets because our VA hasn't really changed a whole lot. We don't do a great job of taking care of our veterans, right? Like it would be, people going to and from work, people trying to find work, people still in bread lines because still not out of the Great Depression. Like all the little bits that go into making a world, that go into making it believable, are usually the bits at the corners and the edges, all the little grungy bits that make it feel real. So I would say that's the best way to avoid making a city or a place into a caricature.
Cool. Thank you. And Linda says she's having a blast listening to us, loving what we do. Thank you. And Nicole says she always says baking is a science and cooking is an art.
It absolutely is.
Well, it looks like those are all the questions, and we are at our 45 minutes. So thank you so much. I did have so much fun geeking out. It looks like people kind of got that vibe too, which is awesome.
Cool.
And of course, this is the book. Otaku, please go and buy it. We both have it. Yay. Go and buy this book. It is really good. I really think that you will all enjoy it. If you like our bookstore, it's funny because we're an anti-capitalist bookstore, but
nice.
Still a bookstore.
Right.
And this book is anti-capitalist.
Sorry. Quick confession. My ideal universe is Ian Banks's culture, where there is no more money. The main rule is don't be an asshole.
Exactly. Earlier today, we did recommendations of anti-capitalist science fiction as well. So that's the kind of bookstore we are. And so I really think that our crowd will be really interested in this book and will love it. So thank you for writing it. Thank you for being with us. One more time, shout it to the back, buy this book on our author events list on Bookshop. You can email us info@chubbyandcoos.com. And the book is called Otaku. Please go and buy it. Thank you so much, Chris, for spending time.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Of course. And you have a good evening. Bye, everyone. Thanks for joining.